Today, we're going to talk about trees with a focus on candidates that are likely to fit in urban gardens. And I'm going to begin with a confession. This summer, we took down a beautiful tree that for years fed pollinators, shaded our house, and brightened our entire neighborhood. Removing it caused many people to shed tears. This is a picture of my backyard with the tree still standing. As you can see, it is obviously in the wrong spot, too close to the house and other structures. Today, we're going to consider how space, location of utility wires and structures, the direction of wind and sun, and the access to soil and water affect tree selection and placement. We will also look at many interesting small to medium-sized trees that are recommended by 6 experts, beginning with Paul Rees, who is the co-author of the publication you see on the top of your page from Oregon State University and is an urban forester. And he was joined by a panel of 5 experts. I think if you live in the Pacific Northwest, you probably have heard of these individuals. So quickly, Zira and Cistus are known for their offerings of climate adapted plants that are likely to do well in our area. J. Frank Schmidt Company is a leader in the horticultural industry that has been doing research and producing new trees that are likely to be successful in the urban environment. Sauvie Island natives focus on natives. And finally, the Elizabeth Miller Botanical Garden is the home of Great Plant Picks, which is a tremendous resource, which I highly encourage you to explore if you're not familiar with it. So my objectives are to help you understand what trees will need to thrive, that you will know how to site a garden tree, and become familiar to many candidates for Pacific Northwest home gardens. Some of these probably are new to you, I hope. So rather than talking a lot about a few trees, I'm going to emphasize lots of trees that are perhaps worthy of further exploration. So to begin with, siting a tree, we need to think about space. And it's important to think about space above and below ground. And it's also important to stretch us and imagine the future. How might the tree look and be shaped in 20 years and beyond? In preparation for this talk, I consulted many sources for the mature height and width of a tree. The Oregon State's Landscape Plant Database is a treasure trove of information. You can see the link to the website there. And they have fantastic photos showing mature trees, young tree, distinguishing features, flowers, leaves, bark, etc. And it's all free. The tree book by Durr and Warren is kind of the most comprehensive compendium. And then Trees to Know, the book by Jensen, is a wonderful field guide. One of the tough things about figuring out how big a tree will get at maturity Its size depends on soil conditions, the location of where it's planted and allowed to grow. So one example is if we look at a redwood tree, when it's grown at the coastal California forest, it may top 300 feet. When it's grown in a Western garden, it may top 100 feet. But if you plant it in the East Coast garden, it's likely to reach 50 feet. So mature size has a lot to do with location and conditions. And finally, remember, some trees will change shape as they grow. So these are forms of mature tree shapes taken from the J. Frank Schmidt Company website. In general, young trees tend to be narrower as they focus on gaining height. And as they reach middle age and older, they begin to widen. Does that sound familiar? Well, the J. Frank Schmidt Company's website is useful in checking the mature shape of trees, as is the OSU publication that I showed you earlier, EC 1438. Every tree they recommend, they also show you a silhouette of the canopy at maturity. I just find this tree, this shape, really interesting. It's called Wirelesszelkova, and it's selected for the low height and the very broad spreading shape, which is considered ideal for planting under utility lines. And remember, roots go far beyond the drip line, and they tend to be in the top 8 to 24 inches. So estimating space is important, mostly because we want to minimize conflict between the tree and other elements such as utility wires and structures. Now we can get some guidance from the USDA Tree Owners Manual and the International Society of Arboriculture's website, and I've put some of them down on this page. But these are just guidelines, and these distances are by no means optimal. In fact, they're a minimum. So I think it's more productive rather than thinking about, how far a tree should be from a variety of features, is to be realistic and in limited spaces, only consider small trees and consider using medium and larger trees only if there is proper space available. So we're going to begin with 12 small trees that are nominated by our experts. As you can see, the majority are deciduous, but there are some evergreen trees for us to consider. All right, we'll begin with fern leaf full moon maple. It is the ultimate four-season tree. It has interesting winter branching pattern. It has gorgeous spring flowers, fantastic summer foliage, and striking fall color. So this is a tree that provides interest year-round. And it's supposedly the favorite of Mrs. Miller, who's the founder of the Miller Garden and the home of the Great Plant Pick program. You're going to hear me talk about 3-season or 4-season interest again and again in describing a variety of trees. Now, 3-season generally would be flower, foliage, and fall color. And if you add interesting bark, branching pattern, then we have 4-season interest. The Chinese fringe tree is another 4-season tree. Interesting bark and branching pattern, spring flowers, fruit, and fall color. I have seen this tree, a large specimen, in full bloom, and it is absolutely spectacular. Crab apples are cousins of eating apples. They just have smaller fruit. And anyone who has grown apples know they have lots of foliar diseases. And that's why ornamental crab apples are bred to be disease resistant. In fact, the horticulture industry has been working on creating disease resistant crab apples for more than 40 years. Sparkling Sprite is grafted on dwarf rootstock, and that's why it tops out at 12 feet height and wide. And as you can see from the photos, it has pretty flowers in the spring, colorful fruit, and is highly disease resistant to keep the foliage looking good through the summer. And this is one of the J. Frank Schmidt introduction trees. Parodia. I love Parodia, and I've grown it before in the previous garden. It is a sturdy tree, yet a small frame, slow growing. It just has an elegant form. It's another four-season tree with beautiful fall color, interesting bark, and colorful flowers and nice foliage. The cultivar Vanessa has a narrower vase-shaped form that's particularly suitable for a smaller space. I grow several crepe myrtles in my garden right now because I like the summer flowers and I love their sensational bark. Today, we can choose from a huge variety of crepe myrtles with different mature size, from anywhere from the mid-teens to over 30 feet high. And that's because of the work done at the US National Arboretum to create disease-resistant hybrids. It's because of the work out of the US Arboretum, National Arboretum, that has allowed further work in the horticultural industry and creating a variety of other hybrids, all of which are disease resistant. And many of the newer introductions have mature size ranging between 10 and 15, 16 feet, which is quite amazing. Now, if you have a really narrow spot, you might consider this ginkgo. And if you plant it, you will be adding a living fossil to your garden. We know that ginkgo has lived since 200 million years ago and it continues to grow today. And even though they look dinty with these very attractive leaves, these trees are tough and they're adapted to a variety of environmental extremes. Now, goat spire is a narrow form, but there are other narrow forms available. And if you do plant a ginkgo tree, be sure to get a male, because although the ginkgo seeds are edible, the fruits are really stinky. You will just be the scourge in your neighborhood. Vine maples are tried and true native. It prefers moist, shaded conditions because it came from the understory of our native forest. The name vine maple came from how it literally has to find its way around other plants in order to reach light in the forest. In case you haven't seen it, there is a cultivated variety called Pacific Fire of the vine maple, and it has absolutely striking coral red stems. Cascara is one of our best native trees with tremendous benefit to wildlife. It's faster growing than the vine maple. It offers wildlife benefits because the flowers feed native bees and the fruits are a favorite of a number of birds, including the band-tailed pigeon. Also, the tree is host to butterfly larvae. And incidentally, bark is commercially harvested as a laxative. And finally, another native pretty tree, Western crabapple. It has white bloom followed by attractive little red apples, and it has pretty fall color in red and yellow. So it's a wonderful 3-season interest tree, and it also provides food benefit for bees, birds, and wildlife. Now we're switching gear to looking at evergreen trees, but these are broadleaf evergreen as opposed to conifers. So our first one is tree mock orange Apetosporum. It has, as you can see in the photo, a rather relaxed look. And the standout features are the evergreen leaves that go up to 6 inches long and very fragrant yellow flowers in the spring. Magnolias come in many sizes. Some are evergreen and some are deciduous. This species is a small evergreen tree that could be grown as a large shrub or tree if you shape it through pruning. As you can see in these photos, it has long, strong leaves. The leaves are about 3 inches long, and it has pretty white flowers. I like the fact that these flowers can begin as early as February and will last through June. And if you've never smelled a magnolia flower, you must do it because it is simply wonderful. The largest cultivar has bigger leaves and flowers. Loquat, another tree with fragrant flowers. And if you plant it, you will be able to smell these fragrant flowers in the middle of a winter. What a treat would that be? It's also a broadleaf evergreen, and I just love the leathery leaves. They look fantastic and they're virtually indestructible. And they're up to 6 inches long. In theory, you can get fruit in mid to late summer, but don't hold your breath because in our area, the Pacific Northwest, cold temperature can wipe them out. We know trees can block prevailing wind and shade the sun. And some of the trees our expert picked would work very well for these purposes. So let's take a look at a second batch of trees. Incense cedar is an Oregon native that is widely considered as a great windbreak. It's a super tough tree. It's drought adapted, tolerates poor soil, hot and dry locations, and it's not prone to disease. The wood is too soft for buildings, so instead it's used in making pencils. I was surprised to find that Southern Oregon supplies the whole world pencil wood that comes from incense cedar. Now, if you want a tree with a dense canopy, Silverleaf Oak can provide that. It has sage green leaves with silvery underside, and in the spring, gold catkins appear to add interest to the tree. This is one of those trees that can be grown as single trunk tree form or in a multi-stem shrub form. And as do most oaks, they need little or no summer water. Pink Dawn Chatulpa. This is an uncommon tree, very underused in gardens. It's drought tolerant after it's established, and its origin are two genera. It's a hybrid between them. This tree, as you can see in the photo, has a very broad canopy, and its best features are these pretty pink flowers. Each one can be 1 inch across, and when you look at the flowers, they look sort of like a foxglove shape. And the cluster of flower can have up to 40. So when I was reading the tree book in preparation for this talk, I learned that Dr. Michael Durr, who's the venerated expert in the horticultural field on woody plants, he lives in Georgia. He tried to grow the Pink Dawn Chatulpa because he was simply smitten by these huge clusters of flowers that last for months during the summer. But in Georgia, the summer moisture caused these big, pretty flowers to develop mildew. Ugh, that sounds pretty horrible, and he had to give up. But in our area with the dry summer season, it's perfect for this tree. Next, I'm going to show you 4 trees that came out of J. Frank Schmidt Company's work. I had mentioned that they have been working for decades in breeding and growing trees. And essentially, they try to create trees that are disease resistant with good, strong forms and superior appearance that will do well in an urban environment. And I was impressed with their tree testing program all across the United States. So we'll begin with the red point maple. You can see that it has strong central leader, a kind of broad pyramid shape canopy to provide shade. And it has gorgeous fall color. And it's highly adaptable to a variety of tough urban conditions. Now, if the maple canopy is too big, the fire starter tupelo has a smaller canopy, but still a pyramidal shape, narrower, shorter, and same thing, strong central leader, predictable performance, bright fall color, and adapted to the urban environment. Pink flare cherry. This tree is a selection raised from seed originating in northern Japan. It offers bigger flowers. It leaves out later for better show of blooms, and is disease-free. And in addition, it has bright fall color. You can see it has a narrow vase form with a very strong trunk and lateral branches. And I also really like the pretty bark. And zelkova is another gorgeous and tough tree that's often used as street trees. City Sprite has a smaller frame, smaller leaves, and a more delicate look. Now, if narrow and upright is not to your taste, Cascara is just the opposite. The photos shown of the Cascara tree on this page are when it's younger, and so it's still shaped like a pyramid. But as the branches continue to grow, they will go outwards and then downwards, and eventually make the canopy very rounded to cast a lot of shade. I just love the heart-shaped leaves. They emerge in the spring looking reddish purple, and as they mature, they turn bluish green. And then in the fall, they turn clear yellow or an apricot color. It is simply spectacular. And the final considerations in siting a tree: soil and water. Obviously, access to soil and water is important because roots need both of them to do well. And in heavy soil, for example, compacted soil, that roots will not be able to get either one. So it's important that we put trees where the roots are not going to be covered by surfaces to cut off both of them. I think most of us know when a freshly planted tree is establishing that we need to take good care of it by watering the root zone. And the guidance is 2 gallons per inch of trunk caliber per week. Now, how do you measure the trunk caliber? Imagine you punch through the center of the trunk and you measure the distance from side to side. That is how you get the trunk caliber. And we already know roots will reach much wider than the span of the crown. And this past summer, in the heat, we certainly saw a lot of mature trees also need water because they were showing drought stress. And the guidance from Oregon State University is water the root zone every 3 weeks and check at least 10 inches below the surface for moisture to make sure that you have covered the root zone sufficiently. However, not all trees need summer water. In fact, some don't like it at all, like the native oaks or cypress. And of course, that's because they came from places that have no summer rain. So I thought rather than, and up until now, we've been looking at trees that need summer water. And since we are increasingly concerned about drought, perhaps it's time for us to switch gear and look at some candidate trees that need little or no summer water for a change. All right, so beginning with the California lilac, ceanothus, it's usually considered a large shrub, but it can easily we can easily shape it by pruning into a small tree. And this cultivar, Hunter Creek, has especially pretty flowers, but there are many other cultivars available. The reason why ceanothus does not need summer water is because it came from a habitat where there is no summer rain or little summer rain. And we have to remember where they came from and thrive are sunny, hot and dry, and also the soil tend to be very lean. And when I say lean soil, I mean soil with a very low organic matter. So what does that mean? It means soil that's not amended with a lot of compost. It means the soil that does not have that dark, rich, humusy look. And it would be what most gardeners consider as really cruddy soil, perhaps with rocks and looking more brown, well, looking more light color instead of a rich brown color. So for ceanothus and the other trees that are to come in this group, to do well, they need good drainage, lean soil, and a sunny location, and little or no summer water. Cypress, McNabb's cypress is a small tree up to 15 to 20 feet. And it's like ceanothus, likes poor, lean soil, good drainage, a sunny location. And both of these species are native to Southwest Oregon. McNabb is just one among many cypress species. And to my eye, I think the feathery, aromatic, silver green foliage is a highlight. Kenyan Live Oak is one of our prettiest Oregon natives. It has very attractive glossy green leaves with a kind of a slight golden underside. And it's like the cypress and ceanothus we just looked at, adapted to dry site. And in addition, Kenyan Live Oak has very deep roots. So that makes it good as a street tree and also a nice garden tree. Again, it does not like summer water. Imagine cutting your water bill by what, half or more. This may be time to begin thinking about including some of these trees that are adapted to a summer dry climate. All right, we will now go to the Mediterranean region for some trees. Olives have been cultivated since 2300 BC. And in fact, some varieties also do well in our area in the Willamette Valley. To repeat the theme, it likes sun, lean soil, good drainage. And the cultivars, if you want to try adding olive to the Portland region or the Pacific Northwest, be sure to use the varieties that have been tried in our region and proven to be winter hardy. Also from the Mediterranean, cork oak. Cork oak is a strong tree with deep roots. Same environmental conditions, sun, lean soil, loves a droughty summer, and the bark has been harvested since the Roman times as floats for their fishing nets. And today it's used for wine cork and bulletin boards. Another beautiful, hardy, tough tree. And I'm going to finish with our Willamette Valley icon, the Oregon white oak, also called Gary oak. It is a habitat and food source for more than 200 wildlife species, including the acorn woodpecker, Merriam's wild turkey. The acorn and foliage provide high protein for wildlife. And this is the ultimate legacy tree. If you have lots of room, plant one, and it will create a reasonable amount of shade when your grandchildren are really old. But isn't that what planting trees are all about? Not just for our own pleasure, but for a legacy to benefit future generations, humans and wildlife. So with that, I'm going to review a couple of resources that I use in developing this talk and recommend them to you. The first publication from Oregon State, we will include a link in the follow-up email after this webinar. Next are 3 books. Sibley's includes about 600 species of trees. The tree book by Durr and Warren includes about 2,400 species and cultivars. And the Trees to Know in Oregon and Washington by Jensen is also a Oregon State publication. And it's a handy field guide if you want to learn trees that you're likely to see in these states. It's a very useful tool. And finally, a couple of websites for you to have fun with. If you like trees, I think you might get a kick out of trying the tree benefit calculator, a quick way to find out what is the monetary value of the tree you have in your garden. Isn't that kind of a fun thing? I did that for all my trees. And then iTree, it is a fantastic website that has so many interesting directions to take you. I highly recommend it. So with that, I'm going to welcome Laura Iyer, my co-host, and we'll have a discussion.
Thank you, Sherry. I loved your pictures. They were so descriptive. You can really see the benefits of having a 3 or 4 season tree in your yard. Larry from somewhere has a question for you. What kind of trees could be planted near underground utilities? He has a situation where he has a 12-foot space with a water line, which is 2 feet from the edge, I'm assuming, of the maybe sidewalk or street. A pine had pushed the PVC pipe and caused a leak. So I think what he's asking is what kind of tree would have a very small depth root canopy that could be used.
Okay, so it sounds like Larry has a limited space, maybe 12 feet-ish for the root zone. And that would suggest a—
No, he has a 12-foot strip.
12-foot strip wide. Okay, but we don't know how the other dimensions. So, right. So coming back with some generalization, if we have a limited space, we want to use a small tree because a smaller tree is going to have a smaller root mass and reach of the roots will be a lesser issue. Often we walk in city areas and we will see, sidewalk conflict with tree roots. And I think from a human perspective, we may say, gosh, that is a terrible tree with aggressive roots. But really, it is the not very wise people who made a bad choice in putting a tree in the place where the roots have no place to go. So I think Larry is really smart in thinking ahead. Now, underground utilities actually, may be an issue, but it's a lesser issue because they can be located, they can be marked before you dig. So you can put down a tree and know not to dig in areas where there are underground utilities. But when it comes to sewer lines, that's another issue because certain trees like to seek out water. For example, willow. It's known as a tree that loves water. And so it would be wise for Larry to plant a small tree and avoid the trees that will seek out moisture. And there is a University of Tennessee extension publication, that's called Sewer Safer Trees. I just love the title. And it lists many species of trees that the roots are not as kind of water hungry and just go after wherever there is moisture. So it would be good to avoid trees from that list. And some of the examples are like poplar, ash, sweet gum, locust, sycamore, and a variety of maples. Not all maples, but the red, sugar, Norway, silver, and box elder maples.
Thank you. That was a good answer. And I know you got enjoyment out of that sewer safer thing. So Kathy has a question. Where did it go? I'll find it. The ice storm that we had in February caused some damage. And then we had the heat dome that caused more damage this summer on trees especially. So do you have a recommendation when a homeowner could begin to prune out not necessarily diseased limbs, but damaged limbs if the tree goes into dormancy and loses their leaves?
Okay, so if I under the question correctly, general guidance in timing of pruning. And this is pruning of damaged parts of the tree. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Damaged,
so
not necessarily disease, because we can take those out.
yeah,
But the damaged ones.
well, damaged ones, it's the same rule as diseased. So it should always be removed because a damaged part is an open wound, and that will leave the tree vulnerable to attack from all sorts of pathogens, bugs, etc. So it's a good idea to always remove dead and diseased parts of any plant as soon as you notice, regardless of when.
Okay, thank you. Found Kathy's question.
Okay.
She would like to know, can you recommend any dogwoods that are small and disease resistant for our area?
Okay, so dogwoods are known to be potentially attacked by anthracnose, which is a fungus. And our native dogwoods, Cornus nutalii, is the most susceptible. The Florida, Cornus florida dogwood are moderately susceptible. And the most disease resistant to anthracnose is the Kusa dogwood, but it's not a total guarantee, and not all species, not all varieties are equally resistant to anthracnose. So it's difficult to recommend a particular cultivar, but I know many of the Kusas had new cultivar varieties that are smaller and more attractive, bigger flowers. So I cannot remember offhand, but I know in the tree book, Michael Durr by Durr and Warren, it's a huge book. It's like 900 pages. You can get it from your library, which is what I did, and just look under Cornus Kusa, and they mentioned all the cultivated varieties that they consider to be garden worthy or worthy for a landscape. And Kathy will be able to find that easily there.
Okay.
Mhm.
Linda asks that early in your presentation, you showed many shapes of trees and named the shape of a tree, which was the same that would be good underneath utility lines.
Yeah, that's the Wirelesszelkova.
How do you spell that last word?
Zelkova, Zelkova. Zelkovas are really fantastic foliage trees. I mean, they just have these beautiful green leaves all summer and always look healthy. I remember seeing in public gardens a row of these trees and just was so taken by them. And that's why when I saw the Wirelesszelkova, which is a typical, very different form from the typical Zelkova, that I just got a big chuckle out of it.
Yeah, it's a great name anyway.
Yeah.
Sharon wants to know, are we going to lose all of our white birches? Mine are mature and well cared for and have a little involvement with borer, but many in our area are all but destroyed. That was during our ice storm, unfortunately.
Well, unfortunately, the birches, when you look at the structure of the wood, you know, a big heavy ice storm with the ice load toward the tip of the branches, I mean, that is just perfect for breaking the long branches. And the borer is an issue. Birch borers are here and they're gradually taking more trees, and birches need water in the summer to do well. And the summer drought is not in their favor. So I don't know how the future would be for birches, but it doesn't look optimistic. And I think one of the big challenges for our gardeners is, what do we do as the climate is changing, as the weather is becoming more extreme? And we have a garden full of plants that we have been growing and babying and coddling for, years or even decades. And it's awfully difficult to switch gear halfway. So, I'd love to right now switch over to ceanothus and cypress and, all these things, even oak and maybe olive. I mean, I love that look, silvery foliage, stuff that will do well, tough. You don't have to run out there and water because, it's going to be 95 degrees today. But how do you transition over to that new palette is a real challenge. So anyway, I'd say anyone with a hot, dry part of the garden where they had not overly amended and enriched the soil might consider switching over to, a new plant palette, assuming you're going to stay there and continue to garden for another 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So food for thought.
Well, thank you, Sherry. It was a great presentation. That's all the time that we have for questions.